Hey there, I'm Long Lost Daylight, and today I'd like to talk to you about the film Obsession. More specifically, what makes the character of Bear so awful. If you haven't seen the film, I will warn you this won't be spoiler free, and if you'd like to watch it anyway, I would advise you to look at some trigger warnings for the film beforehand because at times it's very heavy. So, the premise of Obsession is that a young man called Bear uses a novelty item called the One Wish Willow to make his friend and co worker Nikki love him, overriding her autonomy and control. The situation spirals out of control as an unknown entity controlling Nikki takes more and more desperate measures to please him and make him love her back. When I got back from watching this at the cinema, I looked online to see what other people thought of the film, and I was really surprised to see so many people arguing that Bear is a victim of loneliness, or more specifically, the so-called male loneliness epidemic, and that is somehow an explanation or an excuse for his actions. I think it's really important to remember that Bear is a grown adult in complete control of his own actions and decision making. He just consistently makes very selfish and harmful decisions. The first night after he makes the wish, Bear brings Nikki home and gets into bed with her. Although I'd like to clarify, this is not in a sexual context. At this point, he doesn't know that the wish has worked, and he seems to believe that Nikki is unwell or has taken drugs. He acts in his own interests of he has a crush on her, he wants to spend time with her, instead of trying to get her home safely or try to take care of her as a friend should. Later that evening, he's holding Nikki in bed. She briefly regains control, screams, and recoils away from him. He freaks out, but he seems more concerned about what that impact could be on him and the label of touching her without consent and what that would give him rather than the actual impact of his actions or Nikki's safety. He continues to pursue a relationship with her despite his friend's concerns that she might be unwell or going through personal issues. Again, he doesn't know it's the wish yet. So in this case, he is actively choosing to emotionally take advantage of a friend he believes to be in a vulnerable situation. I think sometimes when talking about films, a fun exercise to do is sort of imagine what different genres characters in the story think they're in. There's a lot of shots in the film, like montages of Nikki and Bears as a couple in a relationship that feel shots very much like a romantic film. There's soft music, and it kind of gets across the idea that Bear genuinely believes he is in a love story, despite knowingly taking advantage of a so-called friend. I've seen a lot of discussion over Nikki being scary at times in the film, and yeah, there are a lot of scenes where she's quite creepy, but I think the scarier thing is how her actions reflect how Bear views and treats women. There's a lot of theories pointing out that her behaviour is quite cat-like and sort of suggesting she's somehow gotten tied to Sandy, Bear's recently deceased cat. But honestly, I think it reflects like this pattern of dehumanising and objectifying. Bear expects his partner to behave more like a pet than a human being, loving and doting without the expectation to reciprocate the same level of adoration. You do also see near the opening of the film that Bear's a very irresponsible pet owner, and that again reflects how he treats other people poorly. The sort of Wish Nikki character makes Bear lunch with little notes in it, but it's oddly in the same way that a parent would. It kind of reflects patterns seen in the real world where men push household tasks and chores onto their partners or expect to kind of be mothered by them without, again, the expectation to reciprocate. This is a really unhealthy dynamic, and it suggests a pretty dim view of how Bear views women. There is a really stark change in Nikki's behaviour and speech after the wish. She pouts a lot. Her speech is a lot softer and higher pitched. She has very innocent and quite open facial expressions, and there's a very obvious lack of the kind of sarcasm and kind of almost like mischievous dynamic we see in her at the start of the film before the wish is made. It's almost childlike, and that is obviously has quite a disturbing effect on you as an audience member, but I think it reflects what Bear wants from a partner or a relationship, a kind of element of control, obedience, and an inherent imbalance in power. It's really quite disturbing. Later in the second half of the film, some of Nikki's behaviour, like reacting badly to Bear spending time with friends or going to events without her, mirrors controlling behaviours in abusive relationships in real life. And it shows that unhealthy or controlling behaviours are part of Bear's idea of an ideal relationship. Focusing again on Bear's behaviour being very selfish, when Nikki behaves erratically and aggressively at a party with her friends, including physically harming herself, his response is to be embarrassed for himself rather than to be concerned for Nikki's safety or concerned for his friends' distress. I almost want to put friends in like sort of quotation marks, like so-called friends, because he's a terrible excuse for friend. He shows no concern for anyone other than himself throughout the entire film, pretty much. At one point, he is in a car with another close friend, Sarah, and Nikki, thinking that he's, well, the sort of wish Nikki thinking that he's maybe talking to another woman, and she feels jealous. She smashes the window in and very graphically beats Sarah to death. Through the entire scene, Bear cowers away, doesn't try to de-escalate the situation or help Sarah, and he doesn't even scream or call for help. He's an incredibly passive character and doesn't take any actions to try and help other people. It's pretty gross. I think the best example of this kind of level of selfish cruelty is there is a scene where Bear gets out of bed in the night, and very briefly the real Nikki is in control of her body enough to speak to him, and she asks him to kill her because she prefers that to living with her agency and control over her own body stripped away. And Bear just walks away and doesn't help her. Even worse, he doesn't just refuse because of the guilt of having to kill someone, although that would still be a very weak argument in that situation. He's offended and he asks, "What's so bad about being with me?" This shows like this deep cruelty and selfishness, as well as obviously objectifying Nikki. He does not care how much he's hurt her despite her supposedly being a close friend. At the very end of the film, Bear dies, which breaks the wish and frees Nikki. She gets her autonomy back, but ultimately she has to deal with the aftermath of his actions. She's lost her closest friend, carries the memory of being puppeted to kill them, and is likely to go to jail for their deaths. Bear effectively doesn't even have to suffer the consequences of his own actions, and although he briefly has his own autonomy stripped away, he doesn't have to suffer through it for very long before he dies. It's honestly a very bitter ending, and it's a bitter ending where the main antagonist doesn't get the sort of retribution he deserves or have to fully face the consequences of his own actions. Nikki, the victim, is unfortunately the one that has to pick up the pieces, and I found out recently that there was actually 2 endings shot. One where Nikki dies at the end as well, and one where she doesn't, and I think the choice to leave that kind of quite heartbreaking ending when you realise, oh my god, she's got to deal with the aftermath and he just gets away, is really effective, if absolutely soul-crushing. Ultimately, Bear is self-centered to the point of objectifying his closest friends, using them for advice or comfort, but not willing to empathize with them or stand up for them when it really matters. When given the choice, he picks his own pleasure over their safety and autonomy over and over again. He deflects blame for the consequences of his own actions, often putting Nikki to blame, and ultimately leaves other people to pick up the pieces. Possibly the only thing more terrifying than Bear is the fact that men like Bear do exist in real life, and although they don't have the power of magical wishes, they can still do very real harm to the people around them. Obviously, I'm not going to try and put a positive spin or like a light-hearted twist on the end of this video, because this film handles a lot of very serious issues that deserve to be handled with respect. Although this is more of a specific analysis than a review, I did enjoy this film, even if it really scared me and made me uncomfortable at times. I'd like to give Obsession an 8.5 for quality and an 8 for enjoyment. Enjoyment being relative, is ultimately it's a harrowing film. I have seen a lot of discussion and debate around the film online, and honestly I'd love to hear in the comments below what you found the most scary about Obsession. I hope you have a lovely day or night wherever you are, and hopefully you can join me next time. See ya!